Okay, well, first of all, let's have you give us your name, when you were born, and where you were born.
Okay. Daniel Oredson, that's pronounced Oredson, and I was born February 17th, 1915, in Powers Lake, North Dakota. And we're going to drop the north out of Dakota because it's so warm up there, you know. What next what did I forget?
You got it all there. So
Oh,
we'll
okay.
just have you kind of talk to me, so we don't need to worry about the lens of the camera or anything. And,
Say that again?
just talk to me.
Oh,
and
okay.
Don't worry about the lens
Yeah.
and the camera itself.
Yeah.
So did you grow up there?
6 months I was there, and then my dad bought a bank in Waukon, Minnesota on Lake Mille Lacs, a little bitty lake about 19 miles long and 15 miles wide. When you were in the middle of it, you couldn't see the shore in any direction, you know. It's like a little inland sea. Great place for a kid to grow up. And we left there when I was 12 years old to move to Minneapolis.
When did you wind up in the military?
February 16th, 1942. I was trying to determine what way I was going to go. I was the office and credit manager for Seco Steel Products in Minneapolis. And I knew that the draft was right on my doorstep. And so I thought, well, maybe the Air Force would be the best place because it was new, fresh, interesting, intriguing, you know, the whole bit. So I put in for the Air Force. And it looked like I was going to be accepted. We had to do a 2-year college exam thing in order to qualify, and I passed that. And so that was in September. And October went by, and November went by, and then December, and not a word from anybody, and then January. Now, at the time, and I think it's still true, if you were 26 years old or over, you could not get into the Air Force cadet program. And I wanted to be a cadet and fly, you know. So here it was on the 16th day of February, and I had sent telegrams to Washington, to Omaha, to every place I could think of that I wanted in, and I would be too old tomorrow. So along about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, here comes a telegram telling the recruiting office in Minneapolis that this guy wants in, let's get him in. So they called me, and they went down, they swore me in around 5 o'clock in the evening. And that means, let's see, 5 and 6, about 11 hours ahead of time before I wouldn't have been able to make it. So I made it on my 25th birthday, you know. And my life's kind of like that, just on the edge. Then I went to Santa Ana and trained as a cadet. And had an interesting thing there. We were called, all the tall guys over 6 feet were called down to the parade grounds. And I can't imagine what it was about. Nobody had told me, but I showed up with the rest of, and we lined up. Well, turns out that I was a quarter of an inch taller than anybody else in the whole place. So I was to be the guidon for the parade when the big shots from Washington, D.C. showed up the following week. And I never heard of what a guidon is. I had no idea. But anyway, that's what I was. And we had 6,000 kids in the parade, and they all guided off on me. I mean, what do you know, you know? And then we had one day that when a submarine supposedly, I've never been able to check it out, shelled Santa Barbara. So everybody was put on guard duty all night long. And it was one of those heavy dew things, you know, where you could hardly see 10 feet ahead of you. And I had all night long, I walked around the perimeter and came down with German measles as a result. So I couldn't go out with my class, and my eyesight dropped off because of the illness, and I didn't qualify for pilot training. So they sent me to be a navigator, which turned out to be fortuitous. I didn't mind that a bit. And I graduated from Mather Field, fifth in the class, and was sent to Boise, Idaho for induction into the B-17 plane, bomber. And we had a 30-day, more or less, it would be night flights, some formation flying, but not much, mostly getting used to the plane, really. And one day it rained really bad, but we still went out on our night flights, and one of the planes ran off the runway and sunk into the mud and spun out and took 3 other B-17s with him, plus all the kids that were working on and around that, including my roommate, Martin Miller. So that was the first time I realized people die in a war. And so from there we went to Salina, Kansas, and then from Salina to Topeka. This was in the middle of the winter, and we lived in tar paper shacks with one coal-burning stove in the middle, and about 30, 40 guys in there. If you're on the fringe, you froze. And from there we went to Alamogordo in New Mexico, and they just opened the base, and we heard such stories as that the chaplain went over the hill, it was so bad. We had 1 helmet full of water a day for all your cleaning and drinking and everything, 1 helmet full. And while we were there, one of the things we were training for was the use of our oxygen mask and flying at high altitude. We had never been above 10,000 feet. Now we went up to 23,000 feet, and we were flying in big circles around the base. And about the time we were getting over El Paso, which is 90 miles south, an engine quit, followed almost immediately by another one. And I told the pilot, I said, right below us is an air base. Look down there, there's a big long runway. And he tipped the plane over in a little bit, and we looked down, and sure enough, there was an air base. Oh, but he says, I have orders never to land there. And I said, let's land there. And on the way down, we lost another engine. And just as he was bringing in the plane on the approach, just about at the beginning of the runway, the other engine quit. It was a dead stick landing, and he did a marvelous job. And nothing was working, of course. We didn't have any brakes, anything. We coasted all the way to the end of the runway. And out comes the general matter and the Hornet wanting to know, what are you guys landing here? You can't land here. And after we got him calmed down, his crew chiefs and things had come out with him, and they were checking the engines, and of course there were no spark plugs in any of the engines. They had been finger tighted only. Somebody had tightened them with the fingers, but never done it with the appropriate pressure wrench, And so we were spewing spark plugs from Alamogordo all the way to El Paso. And, he felt sorry about that. He took us all into the officers' club and bought us a drink. And they had the crew from Alamogordo came down to get the plane because they brought the plugs down with them and whatnot, And that was about it for Alamogordo. And we, of course, got a chance to look at the White Sands and all that area. Then we flew from there across the Gulf of Mexico. It was the first time anybody in the plane thought that the navigator was of any use, When they got out there and they couldn't see land in any direction, across the Gulf. And I kept telling them where we were and how far and how soon and all that. And we came into an air base at just north of Miami. What's the name? Lauderdale? Yeah. Fort Lauderdale? Yeah. I can't remember everything, you know. I'm 91, and so that's part of the thing. I should remember better and not remember the present so well. Well, anyway, we came in and landed there, and somehow the windshield over the bombardier's thing cracked clear across. Well, we couldn't take off again with the group that we were supposed to fly with. And so we finally got our nose cone replaced. And by the way, we were flying in E's and F's. We had no chin turret. We had no armament at all, no metallic things to protect us in any way. Didn't have flak suits, none of that. That was all to come afterwards, you know. We were almost originals. Anyway, we took off from Fort Lauderdale and flew to Trinidad and stayed overnight there. And in the morning, they said one of the planes that was not flying with us, but part of the troop that were flying overseas through the southern route, had disappeared, and they thought the last thing was over Venezuela in the forest over there. And would we do a search and patrol? So we did a search and patrol, but with those high trees and whatnot, a B-17, I think a big building could disappear in there, you'd never see it. And we spent at least 6 hours on a search and patrol, came back, stayed overnight again, and then we flew to Suriname to Paramaribo, and then, wait a minute, Paramaribo, I get them mixed up. I think Paramaribo's at Suriname, and Paramaribo, which was our next stop, is in Brazil. There's a song about it, you know, you remember? Anyway, then to Natal, which is on, if you recall, Brazil comes out to a kind of a peak into the Atlantic there. And from there, we spent 2 days loading up and gassing up, and we took off in the night because the heat was such, and we were overloaded, actually. We mushed along out to the middle of the Atlantic, and then finally it got up on step, and we began to pick up speed. And I kept shooting not sunlines, but the stars, and I felt pretty much where we were and everything. And as we came in, I'm the only one that stayed awake all night. They put it on automatic pilot, and everybody slept except me. So, and all night long I'm navigating away. And then in the morning I started shooting sunlines with the astro compass, and got the plane lined up exactly coming into Gambia, West Africa, which was, I think, a British protectorate, a little bitty thing of a country. And when I felt we were about to see land, I woke everybody up and I said, now let's look for the land. We're about to see it. And within 2 minutes, we did see something that looked like land. And then, of course, what gave me the hint was some of the seabirds were visible to me, you know, and I said, we got to be close to land. So I woke them up and said, we're close to land, and it turned out to be right. And we flew in, and we landed on our first Wheeler metal runway, which is an experience, believe me. We'd never landed on anything so noisy in our life. We thought the plane was falling apart. That was an experience. But anyway, we stayed overnight there, gassed up, and then we flew across the Sahara Desert, 1,000 miles to Marrakesh in Morocco. And that's as bad as flying across the Atlantic. There's nothing, just nothing. And I can tell you some things, but that didn't have no interest. When we got to Marrakesh, we landed with another crew that was following us, and they had a guy named Ace Calkins that played basketball for CSU, not CSU, but for California, down near LA. What's the big?
UCLA?
Yeah.
USA?
Yeah, and USC, and the somehow the General Lady de Bear, that the French fort there, heard about this famous basketball player. So he challenged us flyboys to a basketball game. Well, I was picked because I'm tall, and that was all. And we played, and it couldn't have been more of a diplomatic thing. They beat us 43-42, and we got invited to a dinner then by the general. And by the way, the airport was 8 miles from downtown Marrakesh, where we were staying at the Aleti Hotel. And it was one of those European-type dinners. They serve a plate with a special wine, like you got a plate with a little herring in, and that special wine go with it, and so on. That went on until midnight, and a plate and a different wine. And then it turns out that all the vehicles were locked up, and the only way to get back was to walk. So we walked 8 miles back into Marrakesh. And in the morning, I had a toothache. So I went to the dentist, and I'm sitting in a dental chair, and he says, "I think we got to pull that thing." And I said, "Okay, let's do it, because I'm not on any more fussing." And he got ready, and in comes a sergeant with a big round thing in his arms and covered with a sheet. And then another one came in, and another one. They put the 3 of those round things on the floor right in front of me. And it smelled like burnt, well, like not burnt, like pork, when pork was cooked, you know. Well, it turned out that that night, one of the planes that were following us had hit the mountain right outside the airport, and everybody was killed. And in order to identify 3 of the bodies, they had the heads, and that was what the dentist had to do. Interesting experience, isn't it? It's important to the life story here. But anyway, that happened. And then the next day we flew to Oran and landed at Tafaroui, where I'm walking. It's an old fort. We're walking across the center of the fort, and I ran into an old guy that said, "Hey, Dan." And I said, "Yeah, Don." And he said, he's from my Sunday school class in Minneapolis, of all the places, you know. And then from there, we went to Biskra on the Sahara Desert. That's where we were going to be bombing from. Well, they had just been bombed the night before we arrived there, and then a sergeant was killed, and then lieutenant was killed, and 3 planes were damaged. So it was concluded that we better hurry out of there and go someplace else. And they felt that the Arabs were lighting bomb fires, directing the German bombers into us. And so we moved north to an old lake bed or swamp that had dried up and was really quite solid at Emalila. And so Emalila, what happened there? We had pup tents to live in, and we had the way we put gas in the engines were with 5-gallon cans. We were in a British part of North Africa, so that was our food too. The British provided us with steak and kidney pudding. Now that sounds like it might be tasty, but it came in a tin can with some black gravy, and it was the various innards of various animals, and that was one meal. And then somebody found a dead chicken, and we cooked him up and made chicken soup in the afternoon. So I went from 2 1/4 down to about 167 pounds on that diet. And we had a lot of little experiences there at Emalila that are kind of funny and whatnot. But from there we went to Saint Denis, because all of a sudden, when it started raining in the rainy season there, the dried up lake became a swamp again. Okay. And we had one plane that got stuck so bad that they couldn't pull it out, so they finally got all 4 fans going, and then revving up the engines and a tug pulling on it, we finally got it out to work on some dry ground so that it could take off and go to Saint Denis. At Saint Denis, we went into pyramidal tents, and that was quite a step up in your living quality, you know. And
So you just kind of moved step by step by step. When did you finally arrive at, where you were really going to start into combat?
well, we were combat right from St. Amelila and also from Biskra.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how come they were bombing us, you know. Yeah, and that's where we started. Well, actually, we did a flight from Oran, and I think 2 flights out of Algiers, and that's about it then. And then so that would be 3 when we got to. Of course, this is the same group of 4 planes that started the 8th Air Force, and they had I think 10 or 12 missions that they flew out of England before they came down, and I wasn't with them at that time. And I joined them in Africa.
Where were you bombing from Africa?
Well, we were bombing, let's see, the city of Constantine is probably the biggest city close to us, where we started bombing in real, not like Algiers, where we bombed a couple times, and Oran, where we ran 1 or 2 missions. And then we started bombing Rommel. Rommel was coming across he got within 100 miles of our air base, and at Saint Denis, and we bombed Kasserine Pass. And I don't think we did much damage, to tell you the truth, but our most damage was done hitting the shipping that was bringing down supplies for Rommel. And we did well on that. I remember the 99th was rushed out to hit a whole little armada of planes, of ships, and supporting military ships, and coming into Bizerti to supply Rommel. And they missed the target completely, didn't sink a ship. And so we were alerted, the famous 301st. Not at all famous, but we went and we sunk, I think, 3 or 4 ships and set a bunch on fire. And by that time, they had gotten close to shore, and we were getting flak from the shore batteries. And we lost a few planes, and one of the lead bombardiers did a very heroic thing. He got hit in the back with flak and knocked off his seat up in front, but he crawled back up and managed the thing, and then fainted dead away, you know. And but he did it, and he got, I don't know what award, but I hope it was significant. He did something pretty brave. Then, let's see, from Saint Denis, we did a very tremendous thing. It was considered the most eventful bombing thus far in the North African. It was called the European Mediterranean Theater. Anyway, the intelligence system came up with a story of a huge ammunition ship coming into Palermo. And they called on the 301st to do it because the experience with some of the others was not as good as with us. We were good at bombing. So we hustle up and fly over Palermo, and somebody smartly decided we ought to up our altitude, because if this was an ammunition ship, you know. So, and they were right. When we hit that sucker, we just went right down the funnels and everything, and we just smashed it, and it blew. And we were about 25,000 feet, and woof, like that. We gained about 25 feet in that altitude, nothing flat. The whole flight did, you know. And the damage was so significant, it just blew ships. Palermo's a little oval type harbor with a small entrance and fairly deep, and every ship in the place was blown up on the land, and the buildings were flattening around. My wife and I were there 15 years later, and still some of the damage had not been fixed. We don't know how many people were killed, but it was a devastating thing. And this was before the invasion of Sicily, so we had a lot to do with keeping ammunition away from the foe then. From there, we did support of the various invasions, and we also did, there's a little island in the Italian Straits between Sicily Straits between Sicily and Tunisia. I'm trying to think of it.
Is this Malta?
No, not Malta. Malta is east of there, but it's similar situation as Malta, and it was an Italian island, and it was the Germans had really loaded it down with to protect the straits. And in about 3 or 4 days of bombing, they waved a red flag, and it was invaded without a loss of anybody or anything. We just bombed the heck out of that. We tried to sink the island is what we tried to do. Anyway, then since the 301st had done such good bombing, it was decided that they'd better bomb Rome because, and incidentally, we've had a lot of targets in and around airdromes and marshalling yards and all that prior to doing this particular raid I'm talking about. Because the Germans, it was, what do they call the city? An open city. And they were not supposed to use it for military purposes, but they were. So we bombed it. And we were the lead crew to go over. And you'll hear lead crew for the B-24s, and there's a lead crew for the B-17s. We were the B-17 people that went over. And it was a beautiful sunny day, and we came in from the northwest, flying southeast, and the marshalling yard stood out. The Vatican stood out. The Vatican was 4 or 5 miles from the marshalling yards, and we did a perfect job of bombing. And my wife and I were there, and there happened to be a plaque that at the railroad station there of how many were lost. And I think it's only 4,600 people were killed that day. They just wasn't expecting us to bomb it. And we came in early. It was a surprise to them. And of course, they accused us of bombing the Vatican. And some people believed it, I suppose, but we didn't. And then we bombed southern France and northern Italy, and later on, this has happened after one of the most tragic things happened. We had a mission to Greece, and I was still attached, but I was through with my 50 missions, so I wasn't flying any missions anymore. And they ran into a horrendous fog and cloud formation, and they thought they could climb up out of it, and they couldn't. And so the decision was made to turn around, but nobody had ever trained the guys how to turn around. They'd never turned around yet like this, you know? And they turned around and turned into their own guys, and we lost, I think, 9 planes, something like that. And that would be 900 men, too, at the same time we lost, you know? So that, I don't know why I mentioned that thing, but it was tragic. And anyway, then I was sent home. But first, before going home, I was sent to ran to the fort there, and I was to train French aviators on navigation because they were weak on that and hadn't done much of it. And I did that through a interpreter. I'd say something, and he'd say it in France and so forth. And while I was there, I came down with amoebic dysentery, which is pretty near fatal in most cases. They put me into a field hospital. They didn't have any anesthetic, and I was operated on, and then sent in an ambulance plane to Rabat to catch a plane or a boat home. So they put me on a hospital ship and made me a blackout officer B deck, which contained a whole bunch of German prisoners, which weren't supposed to be on there because it's a hospital ship, you know. So about 3 days out, I noticed that there was a lot of scratches on the portholes. They were all painted over, you know. So I go upstairs to see the big man, and I tell him, hey, they're scratching the paint off down there. And he gets hold of the carpenters and whatnot, and pretty soon we just boarded them in close to it. They could barely move. They couldn't get near the portholes, and he had the portholes painted over. Then, in our last 2 days, as we approached good old USA, we got into one of those late fall storms that we have occasionally, you know. And the ship was standing on end, and most of the guys were sick, and it was a kind of a miserable thing altogether. Anyway, proud flesh formed in the operation they did on me, so they operated again and then sent me to Miami Beach for R&R. Well, because of the operation, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go swimming, or I couldn't do anything. I just useless. And but after a month, they sent me up to Salt Lake City for replacement. And from there to Galveston, Texas, and they were experimenting down there on weather, flying into big storms and trying to get the weather data and all that together. And so I did several missions that way, but they just didn't have instruments that we could effectively use, because when you're in the middle of one of those big thunderstorms, well, I mean, things are like that. St. Elmo's fires rolling up and down the wing, and it was some experience. And we flew long distances to get into some of these things, you know, from Galveston all the way up to the Black Hills one time to get into a big storm. Well, so that was abandoned. Then they had to do something with me, and Pueblo was being sought out as a place to train the free Chinese. They were going to send their officers over to learn formation flying and whatever else us combat people could provide them with. So I was sent to Pueblo for that purpose, and I was on the flight line there. And then I don't know, it must have impressed somebody. We got a call for the 20th Bomb Group on Guam to have a navigator or somebody of equivalent background to work in their lead crew school over there. And so next thing I got that. I remember the order reads secret. I don't know what was secret about it, but anyway, there was so much traffic going out to the Pacific at that time that they couldn't take you on right away. So what they did with me is made me a courier. I had 43 boxes of money, invasion money, that I was then a courier for, and then that got me on a plane, and I flew over to the long route. We flew to Hawaii, and then Johnson Island, and then the Kwajalein, and finally up to Guam. And there we started to set up the school that hadn't been set up yet, and so I worked with them there. And all this time, well, just north of us at Tinian was a big B-29 that sat at the end of the runway, and nobody knew what was there except it was an experimental plane, and nobody was to fuss around there. They didn't want anybody over there, and nobody even guessed what it was. And then one day over the radio we hear that a nuclear bomb had been dropped on, was it Nagasaki first, or what was the first one?
Hiroshima first.
Hiroshima first, huh? Hiroshima first, and then Nagasaki. And then it was like rats leaving a sinking ship. Everybody thought, well, the war's over. The emperor had made the statement to that effect, and so then back to the States. And then I worked for, as a reserve officer, I worked for the Air Force Academy as a liaison officer for 10 years. And that was to help get, you know, the Navy had the Navy League, the Army had its league, and the Marines had theirs, and the Coast Guard, and everybody had, but we didn't have any graduates, you know, so that's what we served as a sort of like recruiters, you know, for prospects for the Air Force Academy. I did that for 10 years. Shall we shut it down? That kind of.
We've got a few questions that we'll ask you here. I'm going to take it back to the Rome raid. You mentioned you were in the lead. Were you in the lead plane or the lead crew?
Lead crew. Well, I was not in the lead crew. We were the deputy lead crew, but our group was the lead crew. I think that's what I said. We were the lead group of B-17s. Now the B-24s did the same thing, so they had a lead crew too. So.
Describe a little bit, what kind of techniques did you use to navigate?
Well, I used, like across the ocean, across the Sahara Desert, and I used my sextant and did navigating by the stars. I did dead reckoning, always did dead reckoning. And lots of times in the States where the hops were short, why I would do just pilotage, you know. That was all. But I kept a running log so I knew where we were. Like they say, what's a navigator do? Well, he's the only one on the plane that knows when we're lost. Joke in there somewhere.
No, it isn't a joke when you're lost.
No.
Was this a difficult process to learn?
Well, I don't know. It took us 6 weeks to learn navigating. And well, we flew practically every day, so we really got rather competent at it, you know. Yeah.
We've heard stories of people transporting planes over and missing the southern tip of Africa and just disappearing. So it must have been tough for some people.
Well, yeah, we lost 2 planes on out of that group that went. See, we flew the southern route because it was in early January of '43, and the northern route was more or less shut down. And the northern route is 4,000 miles, and the southern route was 10,000 miles to England. Now we dropped off sooner by about 400 miles there from North Africa, because we stopped at Marrakesh, you know, and the guys going up to England then continued across the Bay of Biscay and across the English Channel up to England, another 400 miles.
But you did lose some planes.
Huh?
Some planes were lost though.
Oh yeah. Well, we lost that one just even on leaving the States. The first flight out, while we were going to Trinidad, everybody went to Trinidad. That was about 800 miles, maybe 900 miles. And so when the next day after we landed there, why they asked us to do a search and patrol for it, but there was it was hopeless, you know. The jungle in the northern part of Venezuela is pretty significant. At least it was then. I don't know, you know. Things change. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned flying 50 missions, and
Yeah.
a lot of the guys that we've talked to out of the 8th Air Force and flying out of England talked about flying 25 or 30 missions to get their allotment in.
Yeah.
Why was there a difference in Southern Europe?
The difference, I think probably we had it easier in the way of the number of fighters, you know. The biggest group that we ever, I think we had 100 attacked us one time, but that was about it. And the guys out of England had more, you know, fighters attacking them. But I don't know. We had more water to fly over than they did. And It's 6 of one and half a dozen of another. We had rugged living and pup tents and by the way, North Africa, everybody thinks Africa is way south. Well, a good portion of Africa is as far north as Denver. And so you try living in a pup tent in January in Denver, or February. Yeah, January and February we were in pup tents, yeah. So it wasn't, we had a funny thing happen at one time. When we moved up from Biskra, they forgot to take the, I'm trying to think of that stuff, lye, for the slit trenches, to kind of cut the odor down and control the flies and whatnot. Well, they forgot to do that, and so in the short order, it began to smell pretty bad in the group, So somebody got the bright idea, why don't we use some high-octane gas, which we got in 5-gallon cans, So they took some of the cans and they unloaded them into the slit trench. And one night, one of the guys found himself in great need, and he rushed out. And while he was straddled, he thought, "Well, I haven't had a smoke for a long time." So he pulled out a cigarette, and he lit it, and the stuff hit the fan. And, all it was is a burned bottom. It wasn't anything serious, But we like to tell that story. I don't know how much truth there's in it, but I think there's a modicum of truth in it.
Talk about being put on the hot seat.
Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think we had, and...
Did you face fighter attacks on most of your missions, or you mentioned not as many?
No, we didn't have any supporting fighter thing either. I should have dwelt on that a little. We were kind of pioneers. We were early. It's the same group that started the 8th Air Force. It's our same four groups, and the same four groups started the 12th. And things, we were just learning, everybody. Doolittle was our head honcho, and they were trying to get things for us, but we were kind of a secondary front, and we didn't have any planes with a chin turret. We didn't have any metallic support underneath the pilot and co-pilot and the navigator and the bombardier. We didn't have flak suits. We had some walk around oxygen things, but they weren't very reliable. And we flew a lot of our missions at 20 to 25,000 feet, and I don't know. We were just pioneers. Didn't know what we're doing, but did the best we could, under the circumstance. But we did some good bombing in Rome. We did some great bombing in Palermo. We sunk, one of our biggest things as far as notoriety, the Italians had heavy bomber, a heavy cruiser. The largest heavy cruiser in the world with 9-inch armament. That would almost qualify as a battleship, It and its sister ship, the Glorioso, came down one night from Leghorn to La Maddalena harbor in Sardinia, and our intelligence system picked it up. Well, our group, the 301st and the 99th, were assigned targets. They had the Glorioso, and we had the, can't even remember. Just told you and I can't remember. The Trieste, the heaviest bomber, heaviest battleship in the world. Not battleship, but heavy. What am I trying to say?
Cruiser?
Heavy cruiser, yeah. And so 24 planes, that's all we could muster in a hurry to go out, and we sunk the Trieste in 5 minutes, we had never did bombing any better except that ammunition ship in Palermo, right down the funnels, right in, it just all but maybe about 15% of the ship was completely covered with bombs. And we had a photographer from Denver, Henry, anyway, he was our photographer, and the pictures came out just beautiful. And it was Kodak film. So Kodak picked this up and it ran it in 5 ads in national magazines at the time. And it showed the bombs falling, it showed the bombs hitting, it showed the ship sinking, and finally it showed empty water. And that got a lot of publicity for us, I'll tell you. I'm glad that's about all I can think of. Maybe there's a ton of stuff.
That wasn't Henry Dahlberg.
Huh?
Was it Henry Dahlberg?
No.
Okay, it's a different guy.
No, Henry wasn't flying.
No, I didn't think he was.
Yeah, this guy was real old for flying as a photographer. I think he was real old, you know. I was an old man. I was 26, 27 years old. So I think Henry was about 30-something.
Why don't you sit back a little bit? You're getting out of the light here.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me.
But no, that's great.
No. A couple of other questions that we have. It will be very basic questions here, but what was the name of your plane? And what unit were you with?
Well, we didn't have our plane very long. I think it was about our 8th mission when we wiped it out, you know. Did I mention that? I didn't? Well, we had been bombing the only way you could stop Rommel was to cut off his supplies. And so we were bombing all the ships that were coming in, you know, because that's where he's getting his gas and for his tanks, because he was a master of tank warfare. And so we got a presidential unit citation on that group that were coming into Bizerti, and our companion group didn't do anything, and we did all the thing. So we were great, you know. What am I talking about?
You're talking about how your plane got damaged. You know?
Huh?
Oh, your plane got damaged.
Well, we were doing so badly that Rommel got word into Berlin that, hey, we need some help down here. We need some fighter planes. And so the intelligence says, hey, that little airport south of Tunis has gotten 45 Goring yellow nose Me-109s from St. Nazarene. They brought them in to fight with you guys because you're shooting down all these gas and sinking all these gas and whatnot. So we got that intelligence and we thought, well, we'll just catch them all on the ground and blow them up. But they were ready for us when we showed up. And we were just a flight of 16 planes. And we were tail end Charlie because we had just gotten there in January, so we were the last one to. And they shot down a couple planes in the front, and then they started to attack us, and we had the whole 40 on our little plane, and we were dragging behind because we lost one engine and lost the second on the right side, and that would be number 3 and 4 we lost. And we had 4 guys wounded, and Jerry talks to me. He said, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Head for the clouds. Let's get down out of here." And he said, "But how about the mountains?" I said, "Head for the clouds." And there was an undercast, and we did get down in there. And of course, about the time we got down in there, they were running out of gas, and they had to return to their air base anyway. So we flew on back, but we had lost our hydraulics, and we'd lost our intercom, and our co-pilot was slightly wounded, and our 2 waist gunners were badly wounded, and the tail gunner was slightly wounded. And he couldn't talk to anybody, our tail gunner. His name was Fleming. He was from St. Paul, Minnesota. He had brilliant red hair. And he bailed out then. When he couldn't talk to anybody, he opened up his little door, into the plane, and here's two guys bleeding to death on the floor, the two waist gunners. And so he left. And 3 months later, we're coming into Tunis, and here's a big prisoners thing. And there was Fleming. So when we captured Fleming said, he tells this story, and he's funny. He had this new blue heated suit, the first time he had ever worn it, and he bailed out. Now here he comes down out of the sky with a white canopy, his red hair, and a blue suit. And he said the Arabs were down there going, Allah, Allah. That's that story. He'd gotten his first heated suit. Now, it's cold up there. That's the thing I think most of your guys will tell you. It's cold. We didn't have any heated planes or anything like that. It was 40 and 50 below. And a lot of guys lost fingers and toes, Well, anyway, I just can't hang on to a trend here. Oh, we were talking about the number of missions. Actually, they began to realize that they were losing an awful lot of guys, So it became smart to cut back because the guys were not exactly wanting to get in the Air Force if they were being shot down like they were. And so they cut it to 35. Then they used to give double missions on really long flights. And things like that. And then finally down to 25. That was it. So the crews have a chance of getting through. On a proportion or a percentage basis, the Air Force lost, more than anybody in World War II on a percentage basis. That's about it. I've run out of gas.